So this is the directions of the brain. On the anterior, on the horizontal axis, it's going to be in the front of the brain. The posterior is also on the horizontal axis in the back. Superior is going to be on the vertical axis, located above or on the top. And the inferior is going to be on the vertical axis, also located below or on the bottom. So for the surfaces of the brain, we have lateral, which is going to located towards the sides. So lateral is going to be on the outside, furthest from the medial plane. And then for medial, the structures are found in the brain's midline or down the middle. For ipsilateral, refers to the structures on the same side of the body. And contralateral, it refers to structures on the opposite side of the body. For example, a stroke involving the right side of the brain may cause contralateral paralysis of the left leg. For the caudal, it's going to be towards the tail. The dorsal is pertaining to the back or upper structure or upper surface of the body, also structures found on the top of the brain. The rostral is going to be towards the nose, and the ventral is pertaining to the underside or the lower surface of the body, structures located toward the bottom of the human brain or one of its parts. So when looking at the spinal cord, this side is going to be dorsal, superior, and this is the bottom of it is going to be ventral, inferior. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the planes of the brain. And so when we talk about the coronal section, we're really talking about cutting just pretty much this way up and down. So if we do that here, it's really going to give us this kind of cut. This refers to the cuts made to the spinal cord, and basically it's like you're cutting a salami. So you're just going to cut right into that. So it's going to be a transverse cut right there. Okay, so right now I'm going to show a coronal cut. This is a coronal cut. So when we're looking at the scans, that's what this looks like. So for the horizontal cut, we are going to cut the brain this way. Which is here. And when we look at scans, this is what we are actually seeing. So you can see the ventricles in there. Meninges, this is a function for the meninges is to protect the central nervous system. So we have, not on this specimen, but there is a dura mater. It's a membrane that does cover the brain. It is the first of the 3 layers, and it is very tough. There's also an arachnoid membrane and a pia mater, which are the second and third layer with a web-like appearance. The pia mater is a membrane closely attached to the brain surface. But like I said, it's not on this specimen, but those are parts of the meninges. So this is the forebrain. We're going to talk about the forebrain. So the telencephalon is a subdivision of the forebrain. It's this part right here, this entire piece right here. It is comprised of the cerebral cortex, the hippocampus, amygdala, the olfactory bulb, and the basal ganglia. It arches over the dicephalon and the brain stem. So the cerebral cortex, we have 2 hemispheres. We have a right and a left hemisphere. And then we have the sulci, which are the grooves that are in the cerebral cortex. So these grooves in here are going to be the sulci, and then this part on the surface here is going to be the gyri, which are the folds or ridges on the cerebral cortex. Now we're going to talk about the lobes of the brain. So here we're going to have a frontal lobe, which plays a part in smell plus dealing with motor function. And then we have the parietal, which is this section here, that handles all sensory info except for vision, hearing, and smell. And then we have the occipital lobe, which is this piece right here. It receives and interprets visual and sensory messages. And then right here below, we have a temporal, which is involved in hearing and smell. So now we're going to talk about fissures. The medial longitudinal fissure is really just going down the middle of the two hemispheres. It separates them. And then we have a central sulcus, which is separates the parietal and the frontal lobe, which is this right here. And then we have the lateral fissure, which is right here. It's horizontal groove between the temporal, which is right here, and the parietal lobe.
Okay, so here we have the optic chiasm right here. This is the X-shaped structure where the optic nerves cross. It receives visual input, and damage to it would impair your vision. Alright, these here are the olfactory bulbs. They receive information from the olfactory receptors, and damage to them would cause problems with smell. Alright, so right here we have the pituitary gland. It is called the master gland because it controls the secretion of hormones, like oxytocin, which stimulates uterine contractions at childbirth. Alright, so right here we have the cerebellum. It is ventral to the occipital lobe at the back of the brain. It has two hemispheres and a cerebral cortex. It receives visual, auditory, and somatosensory information. And it also smooths motor function, so damage to it would cause problems with coordination. Okay, so this here is the pons. It's located ventral to the cerebellum. It contains part of the reticular formation, which controls level of sleep and consciousness. It also contains nuclei that send information from the cerebral cortex to the spinal cord, and damage to it would result in sleep and arousal problems. So this here is the medulla oblongata. It is the lowest part of the brainstem. It contains nuclei that control vital functions like breathing and blood pressure, and damage to it could cause death since it controls these key functions for survival. So there are 12 cranial nerves. These ones here are the olfactory nerves. They control smell. And then these here where the optic chiasm was, that's for vision. And then I believe this one is the, right there is the oculomotor, which does eye movements. And then there's several others, some for jaw muscles, face muscles, hearing, taste, neck movements, tongue movements, and then the vagus nerve is, it controls the internal organs. It's the largest of the cranial nerves, and it regulates functions of the organs in the thoracic cavities. Okay, so spinal nerves are peripheral nerves that are attached to the spinal cord. Afferent axons bring somatosensory information to the spinal cord, and efferent axons carry motor messages from the CNS, the central nervous system, to the muscles. Dorsal roots send information into the brain, and ventral roots send motor messages out of the brain. A way to remember this is that Incoming messages go through the back, which would be the dorsal roots, and then outgoing information goes through the front, which would be the ventral roots.
As we begin to cut into the brain, you can see here the fourth ventricle, which extends from the cerebral adduct to the obex, and it's filled with cerebrospinal fluid, SBF, and it's a diamond shape that is cross-section in the human brain, and it's located within the pons, or in the upper part of the medulla. A ventricle is a hollow part in a cavity and organ, and there are 4 ventricles that are connected to each other and fluid-filled in the brain. Next, we'll be looking at the pineal gland. It's small and pea-shaped, and its function isn't fully known, but it does produce and regulate melatonin, which helps regulate sleep, and some hormones. The tectum is in the midbrain, and it is responsible for auditory and visual reflexes. It's located in the dorsal part of the mencephalon. The superior coculi is a layered and multisensory structure. The upper layer receives visual signals from the retina of the eye, as the lower layers process multiple signals from various other parts of the brain. The inferior coculi, on the other hand, is part of the midbrain that serves as a main auditory center for the body. It's the channel for almost all auditory signals in the human body. As we cut down longitudinally and stop here at this white fibrous structure crossing horizontally, we're going to gently pull the cerebral hemispheres apart. The corpus callosum has about 200 million axons that interconnect the 2 hemispheres. Its primary function is to integrate motor, sensory, and cognitive motions between the cerebral cortex on one side of the brain to the other mirror side of the brain. As we continue cutting down the medial plane to reveal the mid-sagittal view, there are 6 things we're going to identify. The limbic cortex, which is a brain structure located on both sides of the thalamus, immediately beneath the medial temporal lobe of the cerebrum, primarily in the midbrain. The corpus callosum, and we can see it here via the mid-sagittal view. There are 2 lateral ventricles located in the left and right hemispheres of the brain, which go towards the frontal, occipital, and temporal lobes. Next is the choroid plexus, which is located in the ventricular system, and it circulates spinal fluid. The choroid plexus structures are found within both lateral ventricles, as well as the 3rd and 4th ventricles of the brain, and the optic chiasm is located at the bottom of the brain, where the right and left optic tracts intersect. Now, the thalamus is located just above the brainstem between the cerebral cortex and the midbrain. It relays motor and sensory signals to the cortex, and the hypothalamus is located on the undersurface of the brain, just below the thalamus and above the pituitary gland. An important function of the hypothalamus is to link the nervous system to the endocrine system via the pituitary gland. It controls body temperature, hunger, important aspects of parenting and attachment behaviors, thirst, fatigue, sleep, and circadian rhythms.
We are going to take a look at the midbrain. The tectum is located in the dorsal of the midbrain. Superior and inferior colliculi are the structures of the tectum. The superior colliculi play a role in the visual system. The inferior colliculi play a role as the main auditory center for the body. Next, we are going to take a look at the tegmentum, which is located underneath the tectum. The tectum contains many neurons that plays roles in many different functions. One role that it is seen to play a role with is reflexes, control of movement, and auditory. Next is the cerebellum aqueducts. Location is seen in the mesosphalon, connection of the 3rd ventricle to the 4th ventricle. It contains cerebral spinal fluid. Next we have the medulla oblongata. It is located in the brainstem. It is the cone-shaped. This is part of the brain that controls autonomic functions such as breathing and digestion. Next we have the hippocampus. This is part of the limbic system and is located on the brain's temporal lobe in the center of it. This part of the brain is seen to play a role with long-term memory from past knowledge and experience. The lateral nucleus plays a role in visual system, and the medial nucleus plays a role in auditory. Next we're going to take a look at the cerebellum. This controls movement and coordination, balance, and muscle tone. This is the largest part of the hindbrain. As you can see, it is located where the spinal cord meets the brain. The arbor vitae is the branching structures of the cerebellum. It is located in the middle of the cerebellum. The pons. The pons are a part of nerve fibers that are located on the brainstem. Next, we have the basal ganglia. This is part of the brain that is seen to control movement and learning. An example of this function of the basal ganglia is like catching a ball. This is linked to 3 different parts: the cadet nucleus, and this is associated with motor function. The putamen, this plays a role in movement of the limbs, and the globulus pallidus, this plays a role in voluntary movement. If this part of the brain becomes damaged, it can actually cause movement disorders. It's a pretty interesting fact. So next, we have the hippocampus. This is the part of the limbic system and is located on the brain's temporal lobe in the center of it.